Good morning, class. Today's lesson is going to be on converting fractions to decimals into percents. So we've done some of this already. I just want to expand this a little bit. So I'm just going to give you some notes. You can follow along. You can write them down. They're good things to have. Just a quick how to convert between each one. So let's start number one with fractions to decimals. So I would write these notes down and keep this page handy as you go. Now, fractions to decimals, you know some of them. Some of them you're really good at. If I give you 1/2, lots of you know that that is 0.5. If I give you anything with let's say a quarter, 1/4, lots of you know that that's already 0.25. And of course, if anything has a 10 or 100 on the bottom, we're pretty good at that. 32 divided by 100, you might know that was 0.32. For one thing, you know this is tenths, and this would be hundredths. So if you don't remember those place values, there's a quick reminder. So similarly, if you had 1/5, you might say, well, I don't know what 1/5 is, but I know that if I multiply these by a big old 1, make it 2/2, I would get 2/10. And that's equivalent. 2/10 is the equivalent of 1/5. So, and now I know this is 0.2. So you can learn to go from 1/5, put it into tenths, and then get your 0.2. But what do you do if you have a weird fraction like 3/8? Well, we could go back and we could do 1/8 and 1/4, and we could figure that all out. But I'm going to show you a few other ways to do it. One is this is the same as saying 3 divided by 8. I don't know if you knew that, but it is. So you could do your long division like this if you did not have a calculator. 3 divided by 8, you'd put your decimal here. Don't know if you remember how to do this. And you would say 8 goes into 30. Oh, let's go 3 times. We have some extra tenths left over. Put on a 0, bring down your 0 if you remember doing this, and 8 goes into 60. Well, let's say 7 times to get to 56. And keep putting on zeros. And 8 goes into 45 times. Oh, boom, there we are. We finally got one that went in evenly. So the question is, then you could say, okay, so 3 divided by 8 is really the same as 0.375. That's kind of a long way. You can do long division. That's what it means every time. So let's pick another one that's kind of hard. Like how about, I don't know. Let's do 5/6. Let's say I want to know what that is. I don't have a calculator. What can I do? Well, this means it's the same thing as saying 5 divided by 6. So I could say, okay, let's go 5 divided by 6. 6 goes into 50. 8 times 6 is 48. Oh, we're going to have a repeating decimal because it's just going to keep going. So in the end, 5/6 is the same as 0.83 repeating. So that is what you can do. The other thing you can do is, because most of you will have a calculator in your hand or on your phone, you can simply take your calculator to do 5/6, and you can go 5 divided by 6 on your calculator, and it will give you the 0.833. So I'm glad that you know how to do some of the common fractions and how to convert it into tenths. Some of you understand that process with this 1/5, for example. Because if you know what tenths are, then all the tenths are quite simple, right? 0.8, that's the same as 8/10, because we're in the 10th spot. Which, by the way, you could reduce it down. 2 goes into both of those. Or you could remember doing this. The 2's cancel, and you have 4/5. Oh, excuse me. Okay, so lots of ways to go from fractions to decimals. In the end, if it's very difficult, there'll be some times when I'll just let you use a calculator to do this math right there. 5/6 could be 5 divided by 6. Okay, that's fractions to decimals. Let's go on and let's do decimals to fractions. Kind of started off there. It's number 2. Let's go decimals. So if you're going to go decimals to fractions, we could do some. Let's try 0.32. Let's just try that. So 0.32, if you remember your place values, this should go quite simple. That's tenths. And this one is hundredths, and we always put it in the last spot. So 0.32 is the same as 32 hundredths. Are you done? Pretty much. Now you just need to reduce it if you can. So you can think of what goes into 32 and 100, or what common factors are there. And of course, we could start with 2. We would get 16 and 50. And you could do 2 again, and then you'd stop. So decimals to fractions are quite simple. You just have to be able to reduce pretty good. Let's pick another one. What if it was 0.05? Well, 0.05. Remember tenths and hundreds. So since our 5 is in the hundreds, we have to say that's 5 over 100. And 5 does go into 100. Goes into itself once and goes into 120 times. One more example, a little bit harder. How about 1.605? Whew, that's a tough one. You have your 1 as your whole, so you can leave 1 out here in the whole spot. And then 605 would have to be over, do you remember? Tenths, hundreds, thousandths. And then you would have to reduce that. So at some point in there, you're going to grab your calculator and you're going to start reducing 605 divided by 5. 5 would go into both. Anyway, you would go and you would break that on down. Okay, so decimals to fractions is pretty good. If you do have a whole out front, you can leave the whole out front and just put this part over the fraction. Okay, now what about going to percents? How do we go from decimals to percent? I'll go back and let's go ahead and reduce that 605. So when I divide 605 by 5, I get 121. And when I divide 1,000 by 5, I'm going to get 200. So you could say, anything good to that? Well, I know 121 is only 11, so I'm going to stop. That's going to be my answer right there. Okay, next thing we want to do is take the third thing I want to teach you is to go from decimals to percents. To go from decimals to percents, just take a decimal, any old decimal you want. Let's try 0.35. Well, you can do a few things. First of all, maybe you need to understand clearly that percents means something per 100. So if you can, we talked about that before, the cent part means per 100. So if you can get something to be in the 100 spot, if you can show it like a fraction, this is the same as 35 100ths if I was going to put it as a fraction first. And then you're like, well, aren't I done? Isn't that then 35 per 100? The answer is yeah, that is 35%, because it's 35 per 100 right there. I just did it. So let's just do one more. What if you had 0.05? Well, 0.05, if I put it as a fraction, that's 5 is in the 100 spot. So if you can put it as a fraction first, then you see, oh, it's 5 per 100. Oh, 5 per 100, that's 5%. So probably a lot of you know that we can skip this middle step here if you want to, and you can go right from here to here, or right from this spot here to this spot here. Do you see what has happened every time? Both times the decimal has moved 2 places. 1, 2, to get to 5%. So 0.78, I can put it as 78 per 100, But I know that if I just move my decimal 2 places, that's because you're actually multiplying by 100. You get 78%. So what you can do is if you had 1.69, that's a whole, and then a 69 hundredths, right? If you think of it like that, that's the same as saying I have 1 whole and 69 hundredths. Well, a whole is 100%. If you got the whole test right, you would know that you got 100%. So this 1.69 is like everything you had and then 69% more. So it comes out to a total of 169%. So you want the shortcut version to go from decimals to percents. You're going to multiply the decimal by 100. Okay. If we were to go back decimals to fractions, you're going to put whatever place value your decimal is in, you're going to put into that many, put it over 100 or 1,000 or 10, whatever it is, whatever decimal you have, 0.101. That's going to be 101 over, and you're just going to choose what spot it's in. This is tenths, hundreds, thousands. So you're going to put over 1,000, and then you're going to reduce it if you can. Okay, we can't reduce that particular number. To go back to put fractions to decimals, 2 things you can do. There are common ones. There are some that are common. There are some that you can turn into tenths. You can do long division. And the last option, most of you are going to like it, is use your calculator. Use a calculator to divide. Okay, so there are several things to do there. 4 different options when you're turning fractions to decimals. Okay, let's go do some schoolwork.